On a hot summer day in June 1876, the quiet plains of Montana echoed with the sounds of battle. This was the scene of one of the most infamous clashes in American history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. General George Armstrong Custer, a bold and ambitious leader, led his troops against the combined forces of the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes. At their helm were legendary leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, united in their resistance to the encroaching settlers and US military. This battle, also known as Custer's Last Stand, wasn't just a clash of arms, but a pivotal moment to the struggle for the West. Join us as we delve into the events leading up to this dramatic encounter, the strategies employed, and the lasting legacy of this historic fight. Welcome to our journey through history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The Great Plains, consisting out of modern-day North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Montana, Wyoming, Minnesota, and Iowa, was home to diverse and vibrant Native American cultures called the Northern Plains Indians. Their lives revolved around the buffalo, which provided food, clothing, and shelter. Renowned for their horsemanship and hunting skills, the Northern Plains Indians were adept warriors and hunters, moving with the seasons to follow the herds that sustained them. Life on the Northern Plains was rich with tradition and community, from storytelling around the fire to elaborate ceremonies honoring the spirits. These tribes nurtured deep connections with each other and their environment, but their way of life was under threat when thousands of European settlers and prospectors flooded the area in search of gold. The movement of settlers encroaching on Lakota territory led to overhunting of buffalo and other game, depletion of timber, and contamination of water sources. This environmental degradation directly affected the Lakota's ability to sustain their communities, leading to skirmishes and confrontations. As a result of this, the United States began to establish military fortifications like Fort Phil Kearny, Fort Reno, and Fort Smith that served as bases for military operations against the Lakota, further escalating tensions. The establishment of U.S. Army forts on Indian territory violated the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, which had guaranteed the land to the Lakota, and so the prominent leader and war chief of the Ogallala Lakota Indians, Red Cloud, along with other native tribe leaders, organized a sustained campaign of resistance against the U.S. military presence, starting the Red Cloud's War of 1866 to 1868. One of the most notable battles of Red Cloud's War was Red Cloud's orchestrated ambush that resulted into the death of Captain William J. Fetterman and 80 of his soldiers. This event demonstrated the tactical superiority of the Lakota warriors and their ability to defend their territory effectively. Red Cloud sustained his campaign by leading numerous successful attacks on military forts and supply lines, significantly hampering the US military's ability to operate in the region. Red Cloud's effective resistance forced the US government to negotiate. The treaty resulted in the US agreeing to abandon the Bozeman Trail and dismantle the forts along its route, returning the Powder River country to the Lakota. This marked a significant victory for Red Cloud and his people. The treaty brought a temporary peace and a period of relative stability for the Native American tribes, but would eventually cease to exist after the discovery of gold in the Black Hills in the mid-1870s. This led to an influx of miners and settlers violating the treaty and escalating tensions once again. The violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty and encroachment on Native American lands resulted into the Great Sioux War of 1876 to 1877. In November 1875, the US government sent representatives to meet with the leaders of the Sioux tribes to demand that they move onto reservations. The message was clear and uncompromising. The Native American tribes were ordered to return to their designated reservations by January 31, 1876. This ultimatum applied to all Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and associated tribes living outside the reservation boundaries, particularly those in the Powder River country. The message warned that any tribes or individuals who failed to comply and didn't return to the reservations by the deadline would be considered hostile and subject to military action. When the tribes didn't move to the reservations by the January 31 deadline, the US Army was ordered to force them onto the reservations. In early 1876, the US Army initiated a coordinated three-pronged assault into the Sioux territory. The objective was to converge on Indian strongholds in Montana, particularly targeting the region around the Little Bighorn and Powder Rivers. The plan was to trap the Sioux and Cheyenne between the three columns, cutting off their escape routes and compelling their surrender. General Crook's southern column commenced its march from Fort Fetterman in the Wyoming Territory. Crook's forces included infantry and cavalry regiments, along with Crow and Shoshone Indian scouts. It took them several weeks to reach Powder River on March 17, 1876. Crook's column fought an exhausting battle at Rosebud Creek against Sioux and Cheyenne forces led by Crazy Horse. The battle was inconclusive, and Crook's forces, exhausted and low on supplies, retreated to their base at Goose Creek, effectively removing them from the coordinated effort. Colonel John Gibbon's western column commenced its march from Fort Ellis in Montana Territory. His force consisted of infantry and cavalry units, including the 7th Infantry and elements of the 2nd Cavalry. Gibbon's column moved eastward along the Yellowstone River, aiming to link up with Terry's forces. Gibbon's force was to secure the western approaches and cut off any retreat to the west by the Native American forces. General Terry's eastern column starting point was Fort Abraham Lincoln in the Dakota Territory. His force included the 7th Cavalry under Lieutenant Colonel Custer, along with infantry and artillery units. Terry's column moved westward along the Yellowstone River. His plan with Gibbon was to create a pincer movement from the east and west. While the Terry-Gibbon column was marching toward the mouth of the Little Bighorn, on the evening of June 24, Custer's native scouts arrived at an overlook known as the Crow Nest, 14 miles east of the Little Bighorn River. At sunrise at June 25, Custer scouts reported they could see a massive pony herd and signs of the Native American village, roughly 50 miles in the distance. Custer scouts also spotted the regimental cooking fires that could be seen from 10 miles away, disclosing the regiment's position. Custer contemplated a surprise attack against the encampment the following morning of June 26, but he then received a report informing him that several hostiles had discovered the trail left by his troops. Assuming his presence had been exposed, Custer decided to attack the village without further delay. On the morning of June 25, Custer divided his 12 companies into 3 battalions in anticipation of the forthcoming engagement. 3 companies were placed under the command of Major Marcus Reno, and 3 were placed under the command of Captain Frederick Bentine. 5 companies remained under Custer's immediate command. The 12th Company B under Captain Thomas McDougall had been assigned to escort the slower pack train carrying provisions and additional ammunition. Unknown to Custer, the group of Native Americans seen on his trail was actually leaving the encampment and did not alert the rest of the village. Custer's scouts warned him about the size of the village, with Mitch Boyer reportedly saying, "General, I have been with these Indians for 30 years, and this is the largest village I have ever heard of." Custer's overriding concern was that the Native American group would break up and scatter. He commanded his forces to approach the village at noon and prepare to attack in full daylight. With an impending sense of doom, the Crow scout, half yellow face, prophetically warned Custer, "You and I are going home today by a road we do not know." On June 25, 1876, Major Reno's detachment was the first to attack after receiving orders from Custer. Reno's force crossed the Little Bighorn River around 3 p.m. and quickly realized they faced a large prepared Native American force. Advancing rapidly, Reno's men were initially concealed by trees, but soon found themselves within range of the Hunkpapa Sioux village. Upon seeing the village extend, Reno suspected a trap and halted his advance. He ordered his troops to dismount and form a skirmish line, reducing their firepower. As Reno's men fired into the village, Sioux warriors, enraged by the deaths of some of their families, began a counterattack. Reno's line held briefly, but was soon overwhelmed by a concentrated attack on their left flank. Forced to retreat into the timber, Reno's men were pinned down and under heavy fire. In the chaos, Reno's Arikara scout Bloody Knife was killed, splattering Reno with blood. Shaken, Reno ordered a disorganized retreat across the river, abandoning the wounded. The retreat turned into a rout with soldiers picked off by close-quarter attacks by the Cheyenne. Reno's command suffered significant casualties during the retreat and river crossing, with 3 officers and 29 troopers killed, and more missing or left behind. Following the retreat to Reno Hill, Major Reno's shaken troops were joined by Captain Bentine's column around half an hour later. Bentine had been summoned by a message from Custer, but despite hearing heavy gunfire, Reno insisted on waiting for the pack train to resupply his men before moving. Reinforced by McDougal's Company B and the pack train, the 14 officers and 340 troopers on the bluffs dug rifle pits for defense. Although they heard distinct volleys at 4:20 p.m. from Custer's direction, Bentine focused on reinforcing Reno instead of advancing to help Custer. The entrenched companies eventually followed Ware, but increasing attacks from native warriors forced them back to Reno Hill. They remained pinned down, defending against assaults for 3 hours until nightfall, during which time they dug trenches and witnessed the Indians performing war dances. During the skirmishes, Bentine was hit in the heel by a bullet and led a counterattack to repel close approaching Indians. The companies held their defensive positions on the bluff through the night. On June 25, Reno and Bentine's men positioned on Reno Hill remained unaware of Custer's fate until General Terry arrived on June 27. Custer's force of about 210 men was engaged by the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne, approximately 3.5 miles north of Reno and Bentine's positions. The soldiers found Custer's men dead, stripped, and mutilated, making identification difficult. Custer himself had 2 fatal gunshot wounds, one to his chest and one to his temple. Curley, a Crow scout, reported that Custer had attacked the village after attempting to cross the river but was driven back. Other accounts vary, with some suggesting he died at the river, while others, like Chief Gall's, claim he never reached the river. Cheyenne oral tradition credits Buffalo Calf Road woman with delivering the blow that knocked Custer off his horse. The scattered Sioux and Cheyenne feasted and celebrated during July with no threat from US soldiers. After their celebrations, many of the natives returned to the reservation. Soon, the number of warriors amounted to only about 600. Both Crook and Terry remained immobile for 7 weeks after the battle, awaiting reinforcements and unwilling to venture out against the Sioux and Cheyenne until they had at least 2,000 men. Crook and Terry finally took to the field against the native forces in August. General Nelson Miles took command of the effort in October 1876. In May 1877, Sitting Bull escaped to Canada. Within days, Crazy Horse surrendered at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. The Great Sioux War ended on May 7 with General Miles' defeat of a remaining band of Minniconjou Sioux Indians.